Right now, while you're watching this, there is a chemical storm happening about 3 inches behind your eyes. An actual storm. Somewhere around 100 billion neurons are firing, and every single one of them is talking to its neighbors using tiny chemical messengers that spill across a gap smaller than a wavelength of light. That gap is about 20 nanometers wide. You could fit 5,000 of them across the width of a human hair, and in that ridiculous invisible little space, the entire experience of being you is getting decided. Whether you feel motivated today, whether you snapped at someone this morning, whether you fell in love in 2019, whether you can't stop scrolling at 1 in the morning even though you're exhausted and you know exactly what you're doing. Here's the part that gets me. You have never once chosen any of it. You didn't decide to release dopamine when your phone buzzed. You didn't sign off on the cortisol spike when your boss said, "Quick chat." Your brain ran the whole chemical operation without asking, and then handed you the feeling afterward, and let you believe it was your personality. So today, we're going through them, all of them, every major chemical your brain uses to run you, what it actually does, what happens when there's too much, what happens when there's too little, and which everyday thing you're doing right now is quietly messing with it. By the end of this, you're going to recognize yourself in about 6 of these, and one of them is going to explain something about your life you've been blaming yourself for. Let's start with the one everybody thinks they understand and nobody actually does. Dopamine. You've heard it called the pleasure chemical. That is wrong, and the fact that it's wrong is probably costing you something. Dopamine is not about pleasure. Dopamine is about wanting. It's the chemical of pursuit, of anticipation, of the moment, right before you get the thing. Researchers figured this out with a set of experiments where they blocked dopamine in rats and then put food in front of them. The rats didn't stop enjoying the food. Their faces still made the exact same pleasure expressions when it hit their tongues. They just stopped getting up to go get it. They'd starve next to a full bowl. Wanting was gone. Liking was fine. That distinction explains an enormous amount of modern life. It's why the notification is more compelling than the message. Why the online shopping cart is more exciting than the package arriving. Why you can spend 4 hours chasing something that gives you about 11 seconds of actual satisfaction. Dopamine spikes hardest, not when you get the reward, but when the reward is uncertain. Reliable reward, small spike. Maybe reward, enormous spike. Every slot machine ever built runs on that one fact, and so does every feed on your phone. Too little dopamine, and you get the flat version of yourself. Nothing seems worth doing. Not sad exactly, just no fuel. Push it far enough down, as happens in Parkinson's disease when the dopamine-producing cells in a region called the substantia nigra die off, and you lose the ability to initiate movement at all. Too much dopamine, or dopamine signaling gone haywire, and you drift toward the other edge, seeing meaning in random things, connecting dots that aren't connected. That's why most antipsychotic medications work by blocking dopamine receptors. Then there's serotonin, which has an even worse reputation problem. Everyone calls it the happiness chemical. It isn't. Serotonin is closer to a stability chemical, mood regulation, patience, satiety, sleep, impulse control, the sense of having enough. Serotonin is the part of you that can wait. It's the thing that lets you take the smaller reward later instead of the bigger mess now. Drop it low, and people don't just get sad, they get impulsive, irritable, quick to aggression, unable to sit with discomfort. And here's the fact that always surprises people. Roughly 90% of the serotonin in your body isn't in your brain at all. It's in your gut. It's down there regulating digestion and gut motility, which is a big part of why anxiety makes your stomach turn and why gut problems and mood problems travel together so often. Your gut and your brain are on the same chemical, running a conversation you're not invited to. Norepinephrine is next, and this one is your focus and alertness chemical, also called noradrenaline. Think of it as the brain's contrast dial. When norepinephrine rises, the world gets sharper, attention narrows, irrelevant stuff drops away. It's what makes you suddenly hyper-alert when you hear a noise downstairs at 3 a.m. Most of it comes from a tiny cluster of cells called the locus ceruleus, about 15,000 neurons on each side, which is nothing, and yet they project to basically the entire brain. A rounding error of cells running your entire alertness system. Too little, and you get brain fog, poor concentration, low drive. Too much, and you get that wired, hypervigilant, can't settle feeling, where your body is convinced something is wrong, and your mind is scanning for what. Many ADHD medications work by increasing both norepinephrine and dopamine availability. Many antidepressants target norepinephrine alongside serotonin. Adrenaline, epinephrine, is its louder cousin, and this one is mostly a hormone released by your adrenal glands rather than a brain messenger. But it deserves its place here because it hijacks your entire nervous system in under a second. Heart rate up, airways open, pupils dilate, blood diverted from digestion to muscle, glucose dumped into the bloodstream. Your body preparing, with total commitment, to fight something or run from something. The problem is it can't tell the difference between a predator and an unread email from someone senior. Same chemistry, same physical response, no threat to run from, so it just sits in you and turns into that shaky, hollow feeling in your chest. Which brings us to cortisol. Cortisol is the slow burn. Adrenaline is a sprint. Cortisol is the long occupation. It's your primary stress hormone, and in short bursts it's genuinely useful. It mobilizes energy, sharpens memory for threatening events, keeps you upright through a crisis. It follows a daily rhythm, peaking about 30 to 45 minutes after you wake up, which is why you can feel alert before coffee if you actually slept. The trouble is chronic elevation. When cortisol stays high for months, it starts eating into the system. It suppresses immune function. It disrupts sleep, which raises it further, which disrupts sleep further. And it appears to interfere with the hippocampus, the region central to forming new memories, which is a big part of why people under long-term stress describe feeling like their memory has gone soft. Not imagined. Chemistry. Acetylcholine gets less airtime than it deserves, because it's doing two enormous jobs at once. Out in your body, it's the chemical that makes your muscles contract. Every step, every blink, every heartbeat modulation. In your brain, it's central to learning, attention, and memory encoding. It's the chemical that tells your brain, this moment matters, write it down. Acetylcholine also floods the brain during REM sleep, which is part of why dreams feel so vivid and so real while you're in them. It's also the system that degenerates in Alzheimer's disease. The neurons producing acetylcholine in a region called the nucleus basalis are hit early and hard, and the first generation of Alzheimer's drugs worked by blocking the enzyme that breaks acetylcholine down, trying to keep what's left in circulation longer. Now, GABA and glutamate. These two are the actual heavy machinery of your brain, and almost nobody talks about them, which is strange, because they account for the overwhelming majority of all signaling that happens up there. Everything else we've discussed is more like a volume knob. These two are the signal. Glutamate is the main excitatory neurotransmitter. It says go. It's involved in essentially all learning and memory formation. Every new fact you've ever stored involved glutamate strengthening connections between neurons. But glutamate is genuinely dangerous in excess. Too much of it overexcites neurons until they die, a process called excitotoxicity, and it's part of what causes the damage in a stroke, not just the loss of blood flow, but the flood of glutamate released by dying cells that then kills their neighbors. GABA is the opposite, the main inhibitory neurotransmitter. It says stop, quiet down, don't fire. And that's not a passive role, it's the thing that makes coherent thought possible. Without inhibition, a brain doesn't produce more thinking, it produces a seizure. GABA is what keeps signal from becoming noise. And here's why you already know GABA even if you've never heard the word. Alcohol enhances GABA activity. That's a large part of what being drunk is. Your brain's brakes getting pressed for you, which is also why you feel loose, uninhibited, and unable to walk in a straight line. Benzodiazepines like Xanax and Valium work on the same receptor, which is also why mixing them with alcohol is so dangerous. Two things: pressing the same brake, and the systems that keep you breathing are on the other end of it. Endorphins, your body's own opioids. The name is literally a compression of endogenous morphine, morphine from within. These are released in response to pain, intense exercise, laughter, and stress, and they bind to the exact same receptors that heroin and prescription painkillers do, which tells you something uncomfortable and important. Opioid drugs don't create a new sensation. They flood a system you already have, harder than it was ever built to be flooded. That's why the come down is so brutal, and why the natural version afterward feels so weak by comparison. Your receptors have recalibrated. Endorphins are the reason people can finish a race on a broken foot and not notice until they stop. Pain suppression at exactly the moment survival demands you keep moving. Anandamide is the one almost nobody knows about, and it's got the best name in neuroscience. It comes from the Sanskrit word for bliss. It's your body's natural cannabinoid, and it binds to the same receptors THC does. Anandamide is involved in mood, appetite, pain, and memory, and it's part of the actual chemistry behind runner's high, which for decades everyone assumed was purely endorphins. There's a wrinkle. Endorphins are relatively large molecules and don't cross the blood-brain barrier easily, while anandamide does. So a good chunk of that floating, euphoric post-run feeling appears to be your brain producing its own version of being high. Oxytocin gets called the love hormone or the cuddle chemical, and that's true but incomplete in a way that matters. Oxytocin is released during physical touch, during sex, during childbirth, during breastfeeding, and it drives bonding, trust, and attachment. It's part of why holding someone you love physically lowers your stress response. But oxytocin isn't universally warm. It strengthens in-group bonding, and in doing so, it can sharpen the line between your group and everyone outside it. Studies have found it increasing trust and cooperation toward one's own group while doing nothing for, or even increasing defensiveness toward, outsiders. It's not the chemical of loving everyone. It's the chemical of loving yours, which explains a great deal about human history, honestly. Histamine you know from allergy season. But in the brain, it's a wakefulness chemical. It's one of the systems that keeps you alert and conscious during the day. Which is why older antihistamines make you so drowsy. They cross into the brain and shut down the alertness system along with the sneezing. Newer ones were specifically designed not to cross that barrier. Melatonin is the darkness signal, not a sedative despite how it's sold. Melatonin doesn't knock you out. It tells your body what time it is. Your pineal gland releases it when light levels drop, and that release is what shifts your entire biological clock toward night mode. Which means blue light in the evening isn't just annoying, it's actively sending your brain a message that says it's still daytime, keep going, don't wind down. Your body believes the light over the clock every single time. Adenosine is the one that explains your morning. All day long, as your cells burn energy, adenosine accumulates in your brain. As it builds up, it binds to receptors and creates the sensation of sleep pressure, that heavy, thick tiredness. Sleep is when your brain clears it out. That's the cycle. And caffeine? Caffeine does not give you energy. Caffeine is shaped just enough like adenosine to sit in those receptors without activating them. It blocks the tiredness signal. The adenosine keeps piling up behind the door the whole time, which is exactly why the crash feels like it arrives all at once. The caffeine clears, and everything that was waiting outside comes in together. A few more worth knowing. Glycine is another inhibitory messenger, working mostly in the spinal cord and brainstem, involved in motor control and in the paralysis that keeps you from acting out your dreams. Substance P carries pain signals. The P originally just stood for powder, which is a wonderfully unromantic origin for the chemistry of suffering. Orexin, also called hypocretin, is the wakefulness stabilizer. When the neurons producing it are lost, the result is narcolepsy, sudden uncontrollable sleep intruding into waking life. And BUDNF isn't a neurotransmitter at all, it's a growth factor. But it's the thing that lets your brain build new connections, and it rises significantly with aerobic exercise. It's about as close as anything gets to fertilizer for a brain. So step back and look at what we just walked through. Motivation, calm, focus, fear, memory, love, pain, sleep, hunger, trust. Every one of them a molecule. Every one of them running on a schedule you didn't set, adjusted constantly by things as ordinary as light, movement, sleep, food, and who you spent the afternoon with. Which sounds bleak, but I'd argue it's the opposite. Because if the way you feel is chemistry, then the way you feel is not a verdict on your character. That flat, unmotivated week wasn't laziness. That 3 a.m. dread wasn't insight. That inability to stop refreshing wasn't weakness. It was a system doing exactly what it evolved to do, in an environment it was never designed for. And you can't choose your chemistry directly, but almost every input we mentioned, light, sleep, movement, touch, what you eat, what you look at before bed, is something you have some say over. You don't control the storm. You do get to influence the weather. And now at least, you know what's actually going on in there.